new management commission is called the Expenditure Management Commission as against the previous name which was Expenditure Reforms Commission.
Yes.
Is there any difference in the semantics or has the government given up on reforms because it is more difficult and the government wants to manage expenses? Is there a difference at all? I'm just reading too much into the name.
No, I do not think there is much of a difference. This is only a matter of words and semantics. What I feel is that the earlier commission headed by Mr. K.P. Gita Krishnan, who was former finance secretary, did look at about 40 ministries, suggested some downsizing, abolition of some departments, improvement of focusing of subsidies. It's a very detailed report. I think they took about 2 years, and I was also involved at the time because I was a part of the government. I'm not sure whether these recommendations have been implemented at all. Now the new commission under Dr. Bimal Jalan, I think it's a very, very timely commission because right now the fiscal system is under tremendous stress. And Dr. Bimal Jalan is the right person, very competent because he was finance secretary, he was also governor RBI, and in one avatar, of course, he was also member of parliament. He's a very, very knowledgeable person. So I think it's very good that the government appointed this commission. But I'm more worried about the non-implementation of recommendations of K.P. Gita Krishnan committee. And I think Dr. Bimal Jalan should look at it very carefully.
Okay, sir. So question number 2. When you did some part of the fiscal deficit for the government, but if you look at the revenue expenditure, interest payments account for a large bulk of it, where the single largest head on the revenue expenses followed closely by transfer to states and subsidies.
Yes.
There is very little you can do about interest payments or transfer to states, but the only thing you can do about is subsidies. But how easy is it to do something about subsidies? You spoke about corporate subsidies, but it is only one part of it. We have food subsidies, oil subsidies, and other host of. Which of these items in the subsidy list can be pruned down?
You see, when we talk of subsidies, we often confine ourselves to the subsidies on food, fertilizers, oil, and maybe some electricity. But we forget that almost about 500,000 crores is a subsidy given to corporates by way of revenue foregone. That is very. Now there is a link between corporate subsidies and this subsidy on oil, electricity, and other items. I'll explain. For example, right now the electricity is being produced from natural gas, which is actually generated from Krishna Godavari basin. Now when you increase the price of natural gas, there is a increase in the price of electricity because the utilities are helpless. So this gets reflected as a subsidy given because the consumers cannot bear it, and domestic consumers cannot bear it. So there is a subsidy granted government to these utilities. So indirectly, the subsidy on electricity is really a subsidy given to the corporates producing gas. We are actually subsidizing their profits. So I think one should really recognize that there is a very clear link between the two. Now I'll give the example of fertilizer. Now fertilizer subsidy is indirectly related to the subsidy. Indirectly, part of the subsidies go to the fertilizer companies. So it's very important to look at this. When you say subsidies should be reduced, it's become very fashionable for every government to say that we want to reduce subsidies. I think you must attack it. I think the even food grains, when it comes to that, Food Corporation of India. Now the inefficiencies of Food Corporation of India create a higher cost, unit cost, and that gets reflected as subsidy on food grains. So basically what we should do is we should reform is Food Corporation of India as far as food subsidies are concerned. Then fertilizers, other companies, there should be greater competition, greater efficiency, and gas price should be according to the production sharing contract and arm's length price, competitive price, not a high price which is highly subjectively decided by the Ministry of Petroleum Cabinet. I think this is a very important one. I think unless we look at these fundamental reforms, and then the second thing is the delivery systems. Most of the subsidy delivery systems are not subject to social audit. I think there is an independent audit of these delivery systems. I think to some extent we can target the subsidies and then we can improve the percentage of the benefits which reach the ultimate beneficiaries.
Should I start?
Yes.
Yes, we've had two white paper on, we've had two white papers on subsidies and nothing much has. In fact, papers keep talking about merit subsidy, non-merit subsidy. Are these matters of discretion? It is very easy to identify which is merit, which is non-merit. Why is it that despite these two white papers, there's really been very little progress? In fact, subsidy as a percentage of GDP is still very high.
The subsidies we are talking of is about 2,30,000 crores, which is hardly 2% of the GDP. Now, you must know that when we talk of subsidy on petroleum products, we should know that the subsidy is a wrong word used because the petroleum products are actually 40% of the price is because of taxation by the states and the center. So in a way, because of government's imprudence, fiscal imprudence, government is taxing petroleum products heavily, and on the other side, they say that the oil companies are incurring under recoveries, so they want to subsidize. I think one has to look at this entire thing and see that if you really want to reduce the price of petroleum products and link it, bring it on par with the international price level, I think this taxation part of it is very, very heavy. I think that has to be looked at. Now, somehow these white papers which have been released and all, they don't address these fundamental aspects, the root causes.
Okay, sir. On to the next question.
Yes.
When you talk about government salary structure and government employees pay also being a big item in government expenses, the fact is that we already have a 7th pay commission, given the fact that the 5th and 6th pay commissions made a huge dent in government financial position.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
are the chances that it will really be able to do something? Will the government really be able to stand firm and say our financial position does not permit it when the pay commission is 6th?
I remember, yeah.
If you remember, in the European countries, the first cut came on in the public sector in government salaries, whereas in India, this is really out of question. Government salaries are always protected even though there is an indexation to inflation. What are the chances that the 7th pay commission will again create complete havoc amongst government finances?
I would go back to the 5th pay commission. The 5th pay commission actually had two parts in it, report. The first part is about hiking the salaries. But the second part is more important, which actually talked of reforming the personnel side and improving their productivity and many incentives and disincentives. Now, the government ought to have adopted this report in its totality. Unfortunately, at the time, because of intense pressure from the unions, the government caved in and they accepted the first part, which is really the salary hikes, and they jettisoned the second part, which is on reform. Now, any price hike, in my view, should have a corresponding part in the pay commission report on reforming on the staff side, the salaries, incentive structure, disincentive structure. Now, it's very difficult for the government to, sack people, retirement schemes. They don't work in reality because of our politico-economic condition. A more acceptable thing would be to improve the productivity of the existing staff by redeploying them. And also, I think behind all this is a more basic issue. See, today the central government's role, what exactly is the role? They are very active in areas where the subjects belong to the states and the constitution. Now, the center's role, in my view, is basically in defense, foreign affairs. Now, their interventions must be more intense in some of the remote states like northeastern states, island states, or states which require help. And they should concentrate more and more on strengthening institutions rather than spending money. When the planning commission or the government, they measure the outcomes in terms of, I think what is more important is they must try to strengthen institutions, regulators, and then allow those institutions to work rather than government spending money. Every rupee that goes out of the government's budget is a reform rupee. So these are some of the things. I hope the 7th Pay Commission will look at this. Now the salary structure is fairly attractive, fairly remunerative for the employees. And I think their productivity, I think, is the most important. I hope Dr. Bimal Jalan will look at this aspect in greater detail. And I hope he will do something on this. Now, I have got one suggestion. When you talk of these flagship programs, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and all, I mean, not much of attention has been paid, even though people, they're spending about 20,000 crores, 30,000 crores on National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Nobody is looking at the asset creation. I have personally collected information under Right Information Act. I went to villages, looked at the assets. Very often I found a tank is desilted under the NREGA and wages are paid to the workers. But the so-called tank, the desilting is a spurious one because area which is under the command of the tank has already got converted into a real estate area. Buildings are being constructed, so there is no irrigation at all. So what is happening is they are just pouring this money into waste without looking at the quality of assets. And similarly, social sector programs. They are giving a lot of money, Ministry of Social Justice, Ministry of Education and others, to a number of NGOs. But there is nowhere any evaluation of the background of the NGOs, where are they spending this money, what are the outcomes. And I remember I conducted at the time a check and I found many spurious NGOs. I think what is important is in all the social schemes, the beneficiaries must be rated. There must be a rating system. And then according to their rating, the government also should release. Otherwise, giving money like this, pouring money into spurious NGOs is not correct. I think some of these reforms, I think, are urgently called for. And I know that Dr. Bimal Jalan used to discuss this with me, and I'm sure he will look into this.
Okay, sir. So, next question.
Yeah.
Coming to the long term, the problem with government fiscal data is that there is a great deal of questions being asked about the integrity of data. And key to that is the fact that government expenses are on a cash basis, and there has been frequent demands, particularly from the RBI, that this must be shifted from an accrual basis because only then you will get a complete picture of the government expenses and scope for defining expenditure year after year will not be there. How difficult is it, and was it ever considered when you...
No, it was considered. In fact, I chaired the committee that drafted the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Bill. It became an act with some dilution, doesn't matter. Now, when we drafted this legislation, we did look at the possibility of introducing accrual system. Now, the problem is that the entire government budgeting is on cash basis. In fact, many countries, many advanced countries, this cash budgeting is common. It is in vogue. Now, accrual accounting is more, it's good to have accrual accounting, but it is not that easy. But we can adopt some of the good features, the positive features of accrual accounting, like contingent liabilities, and then asset, inventorization, and that kind of thing, we can introduce. Ultimately, it has to be a somewhat mixed kind of a thing. The accrual system can be at a much more macro level, and that's why we suggested in the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act a medium-term kind of an assessment, a fiscal plan and all that, where some of these things will get reflected. But I think slowly the government should move towards accrual system. It's not easy.
Okay, so the last question. Hello.
Yeah.
How can we ensure implementation of the recommendations, because the earlier commission's recommendations were never implemented? Any good thoughts on how we can ensure implementation this time now?
Implementation is always a problem, because once a report is submitted, that goes into the bureaucratic, juggernaut. The whole thing gets, processed and all. I think I would suggest to the new government that once Dr. Bimal Jalan's report is given, I think there should be a task force kind of thing in the Ministry of Finance. Actually, it should be located in the Ministry of Finance, and at a fairly senior level. And they must take these recommendations one by one, and then they should they should monitor the implementation of these recommendations very closely. My only request to the government is that this Jalan report, I think it is due in end of 2015 or beginning of 2016. I think they should compress it, because there is not much of time left. And today, the fiscal deficit is almost 4.8% of GDP, which is very, very high. It actually exceeds all the expectations of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. And the previous government went on relaxing that act. So I think there is not much of time left. And today there are inflationary pressures in the economy. Unless we tighten our belts, the government is going to face price increases and whatnot in the economy, and that will actually impact the poor. See, whatever the programs the government implements, inflation actually erodes the value of that. So my suggestion very sincerely will be that the government should have this finance ministry based, very senior level task force which should really monitor these recommendations. And I am absolutely hopeful that what Dr. Bimal Jalan is going to recommend, those recommendations are going to have very far-reaching value. But my only request to Dr. Bimal Jalan in conclusion is that he should not address it in short term. He should have a look at the role of the central government, reorient central government's entire direction towards areas where central government should really intervene, especially the northern states and island states, northeastern states, and remote areas, backward areas, that kind of thing. And it should concentrate more on institutions, concentrate more on regulatory systems where the regulation replaces political decision making. Example is that you take the case of gas price. This gas price issue in the Ministry of Petroleum, or strictly speaking, it should not be dealt with by the government. It should be given to a regulator with quasi-judicial authority, which can be questioned by anybody in an appellate authority. That kind of thing. They must move towards institutions. I think this rupees, everything measuring everything in rupees, I think that has really created this problem.